Othello begins in Venice. We're in the middle of an argument between Rodrigo and Iago. Basically, Rodrigo's been paying Iago to help him win over Desdemona. But Rodrigo also just found out that Desdemona has married Othello. Othello's a general, and Iago doesn't really like that he's in charge of him. And Iago just got passed over for being a lieutenant. The guy who got the lieutenant job was Cassio. Rodrigo and Iago start yelling out to Barbangio. They're like, hey, your daughter got stolen. And Barbangio doesn't believe him. But he ends up going and checking and finds out that his daughter is missing. And he gets some officers together and he's like, we're going to go find Othello. Barbangio and Rodrigo show up and they start accusing Othello of stealing Desdemona by witchcraft. But Othello's like, no, that didn't happen. I actually won her love by stories of adventure and war. And everyone's like, yeah, that sounds about right. And then this guy comes up to Othello and is like, hey, you kind of got to go to Cyprus to help fight against the Turks, who this big war is happening. So they take off, but they find out shortly that the Turkish fleet has wrecked in a storm at sea. And Cassio and Iago, Rodrigo, and Desdemona, and Emilia, they all show up, and they're like, I wonder if Othello survived, and then they see his ship. And Cassio and Desdemona are so happy that they like grasp each other's hands, and they're all excited. And Iago sees this, and he's like, I can make something happen from this. So Othello arrives, and he's like, we're gonna go celebrate. Cassio, you can watch over everything. And then Rodrigo starts complaining, but Iago's like, don't worry, Rodrigo. She'll lose interest in Othello and seek someone else to have sex with. But that someone else is going to be Cassio, so you gotta take care of that. And Rodrigo's like, okay. So Iago goes and talks to Cassio, and Cassio, out of the blue, tells Iago, you know what, I can't handle my alcohol. And Iago's like, conveniently, look what I have, alcohol. And then Rodrigo starts coming in after Cassio got drunk, and he starts trying to fight Cassio, and Cassio starts chasing him around. Well, one thing leads to another, and Cassio ends up stabbing another man named Governor Montano. And then Rodrigo runs and tells on him, and is like, hey, guess what Cassio did? Well, Othello shows up, kind of upset. So he's like, what's going on back over here? Iago, tell me. And Iago's like, well, I don't want to say. And then Othello's like, you kind of got to say. So Iago's like, okay, I'll tell you. It's all Cassio's fault. He got drunk and stabbed a guy. And Othello's like, no, Cassio, you're no longer lieutenant. So by Iago's advice, Cassio goes and tries to talk to Desdemona. Desdemona's like, yeah, okay, I can try to see what I can do. And as Cassio's about to leave, Othello and Iago kind of show up. And Cassio looks at him, he's like, oh god, Othello's here, I don't want him to see me, and he runs off. And Othello's like, wonder why Cassio just departed from my wife all worried. And Iago's like, I don't know. And Othello starts getting upset and moody, and he's like, I think my wife's cheating. And Iago's like, you know what, you could be right. And he kind of suggests that there's an affair going on between Cassio and Desdemona. Othello starts getting a headache, and he's like, I'm not going to go to dinner now. Well, Desdemona then comes, like, you know what, here, use this handkerchief, the one that you gave me to symbolize our love, this handkerchief, I'm going to wrap it around your head. But he's like, no, don't do that. And he throws it on the floor. And Emilia, who's the Desdemona's, like, maid almost, picks it up and is like, you know what? My husband, Iago, has mentioned before that he wants this. I'm going to take it. So Iago gets the handkerchief, and he's all excited. And then he goes and plants it in Cassio's room. When Othello comes back, and he's like, hey, where's that evidence? And Iago's like, I mean, I've seen Cassio wipe his beard with that handkerchief. And Othello's just like, I'm going to take vengeance on Cassio and Desdemona. And Iago's like, I'm going to help. So Othello sees Desdemona later that evening, and he's like, I need that handkerchief. And she's like, I don't happen to have it on me at this exact moment, but how about you get Cassio back as a lieutenant? And Othello's like, well, how dare you change the subject by bringing up Cassio when I'm asking for this handkerchief? And he takes off all mad, and Cassio then kind of walks around. He's like, well, how in the world did I get this handkerchief? Hey Bianca, my sleeping partner who I pay, why don't you go copy the embroidery of this here handkerchief? And then go back to see Iago and Othello. Iago tells Othello, is like, hey, I have a thing planned with Cassio as a meeting, and we're going to talk about Desdemona. So why don't you go and hide over there in the bushes and just watch Cassio's face as we talk. And Othello's like, that's a great idea. So Iago starts talking to Cassio, but he starts talking about Bianca, not Desdemona. And Cassio's all laughing and having a good time talking about Bianca. And then Bianca herself enters with Desdemona's handkerchief and is like, how dare you make me copy this handkerchief from another woman? And then throws it at him. And then time passes, and later that night, Othello accuses Desdemona of being a whore. Just outright. And she's like, no, I'm not. And then Amelia's like, no, she's not. And Othello's like, doesn't matter. You need to just wait in the bed for me to get back. Amelia, leave. And Iago then runs into Rodrigo and he's like, you gotta kill Cassio. Because Cassio is the only thing that stands between you and loving Desdemona. And Rodrigo just suddenly believes him, like, okay. So Rodrigo, as you could suspect, he messes up and Cassio ends up wounding him. Iago just kind of runs in the background, like stabs Cassio and runs away. And Iago suddenly shows up and is like, oh my god, Rodrigo, how dare you try to kill Cassio? I'm going to stab you a lot. And he murders Rodrigo. And then, while that's happening, Othello's standing over his sleeping wife, and he's about to kill her, and then Desdemona wakes up. And she's like, please, Othello, don't kill me. I'm innocent. But Othello's like, nope, you're not, and smothers her. So then Amelia enters, and is like, hey, by the way, Othello, Rodrigo's dead. And Othello's like, don't you mean Cassio? And then Amelia's like, nope, he's alive. He's just wounded. And Othello's all upset about that. And then suddenly Desdemona comes back to life and is like, I have been murdered. And then she sees Amelia and is like, I committed suicide. Ah! And then she dies. And Amelia is like, Othello, what happened? And Othello's like, I kind of killed her. Iago told me that she was being dishonest. I believed him, so I killed her. So then at this point, that Montano and Gravaggio and Iago and all them, they come into the room, and Amelia starts talking about how Iago has actually made all this happen. And Othello's like, no, honest Iago would never do that. The handkerchief, that's the evidence. And Amelia starts telling him about how she got the handkerchief for Iago. And Othello's suddenly like, oh no, Iago, why would you do this? You horrible monster. Iago then kills Amelia. And he starts trying to take off, but he is then caught. And he's being held captive, and then they bring in Cassio, who is now in this little wheelchair type thing because of his wound. And then this other guy tells Othello, like, hey, you need to come back to Venice, and you gotta be tried in court. And Othello starts making a speech, and he's like, I need to be remembered as a good guy. And then he takes his own sword and stabs himself, and he dies. And then what happens to Iago is he is then ordered to be tortured and then eventually executed. And that's the end of the play. Yeah. The end.